Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified. The what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from the civil services examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily edition dated 14th September 2022. The topics which are to be discussed have been enlisted on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. Now let us begin with our first topic. This topic has appeared at page number 6 and the topic reads, for India, the buzzword now is all alignment. Now this topic is mainly from the international relations sections, that is General Studies Mains paper 2, because it mentions the bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements which involve the Indian interests. Now this topic has come in the context of the upcoming Shanghai Cooperation Organization meet and India's participation in it. This article has written by Suhasini Haidar and presents a very good picture of the multi-alignment or the all-alignment strategy of India. So in today's session, we are going to discuss in detail about two things. One is the all-alignment approach of India, given the backdrop of non-alignment policy which still now we have followed. And the second is the brief basics and the analysis of Shanghai Cooperation Organization also. So let us now begin our discussion in detail. First of all, to understand that what exactly is the all-alignment or the multi-alignment, we must understand the present world geopolitics. With the help of this map, today we will understand and will have a brief overview of the world geopolitics, the complexities, the concerns, the conflicts associated between the major countries which are of utmost relevance for India. Yes, I agree that as far as the geopolitics is concerned, every country is important for every other country, and similarly for India also every country is important. For example, when it comes the matter of voting in the United Nations, then obviously because each country has its own vote, so every country matters to India. But because today we are going to discuss the overview of the world geopolitics, so that is why from our examinations perspective there are few countries, the major countries with which India has significant relations and their policies directly impact the Indian interests. So for today's discussion and to understand the today's context, the today's article, we have taken few countries, that is US, Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, Israel, the Arab world as well as Australia. So now let us have some overview about these countries and the present geopolitics. First of all, we all understand that when India got independent and the period just after the independence witnessed the Cold War era. And this Cold War era was basically the rivalry between two major blocs. One was led by USA and the other was the USSR. This bloc was particularly led by Russia. Now this was a fight between capitalism and communism. And during this period, there was a very delicate situation in front of India that which bloc or which part should India choose. So at this particular point of time, India chose the policy of non-alignment. And this policy was a very wise decision because the policy makers at that particular point of time in India thought that both the world, that is USA as well as USSR, are important for India. Because India was still a nascent country after the independence, we were having several complex issues at our own home. We were facing wars, we were facing poverty, hunger, economic crisis. So in this scenario, we could not take the sides of any one major bloc, and that is why we said that we will be a neutral country, we will be a non-aligned country. That is, we independently will determine our interests and foreign policies. And this formed the bedrock of today's geopolitics. However, the Cold War got over in 1990s, but still the rivalry between US and Russia continues.
We all understand this. The rivalry is basically in terms of gaining control over certain areas, especially the West Asian region. So, this is one complex issue which today's geopolitics is facing. The second issue is related to the new rivalry which is taking place between US and China. We all know that with the steep economic, political, as well as military rise of China has threatened the unipolar world which was dominated by USA in the post-Cold War period. And that is why there is a straight rivalry between US and China at several fronts. For example, gaining the domination or control over the Indo-Pacific region. And that is why both these countries from time to time come up with certain strategies and policies so that they can show their own dominance in this particular region. Now, if we look at this West Asian region, here we all understand that there is a direct conflict between Israel as well as the Arab world, especially led by Saudi Arabia. And more interestingly, the fact is that USA, for that matter, have friendly relationship with Israel as well as Saudi Arabia. Now, US also has its issues with Iran, and the basis of this issue is the nuclear enrichment program of Iran. So, in this whole complex world geopolitics, the concerns associated with it, where does the position of India lies? How are we managing? What are our own conflicts? So, this we will understand with the help of a different map. Now, we will look at the relevance of all these countries for India. First is the USA. Now we know that USA is one of the largest trading partner with India. There is a huge Indian diaspora which is living in the US, and that is why it becomes of paramount importance for India to have friendly relations with US. Similarly, US in nowadays have become one of the largest defense equipments as well as technology exporter to India. So to meet its military needs also, India needs US. But now, if India needs US and India grows its close relationship with US, then obviously in a way it may antagonize Russia, because we have seen that there is a direct rivalry of US with Russia as well as China. But again, we cannot ignore Russia also, because first we have a very strong history of friendly relations with each other. Second, Russia is still a major defense supplier for Indian needs, and India also needs Russia for its oil. Recently, you must have come across the news that defying the US sanctions against Russia, India has started to purchase the Russian oil at discounted price. So that is why India needs Russia also. Next comes China. Now, with China in recent times, there is a very stiff relationship. We all are aware about the Doklam conflict, we all are aware about the Galwan conflict, and still, while we are discussing this session, the disengagement process is going on in the Ladakh region. So, there are several military conflicts between India and China in recent times, but still, India and China has continued their bilateral trade. The trade has not been affected because the wheels of economy must rotate at all times. And that is why India cannot altogether exclude China from its IR policies. Next comes Pakistan. Now, the relationship with Pakistan since 2016 is very stiff because of the continuous cross-border terrorism, continuous infiltration, and several other issues. India and Pakistan have not holded any bilateral talks at the top summit level. Yes, there have been certain mutual participation in different organizations, for example, meetings at Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, etc. But the bilateral talks has not taken place. But as the saying goes that we do not have any choice to choose our own neighbors. So the reality is that Pakistan is our neighbor, and stable Pakistan is obviously in the long-term interests of India. Next comes the Arab world, again relevant for India as far as its oil needs are concerned, protection of the interests of Indian diaspora and trade. And Israel is again important for defense as well as agricultural technologies. Similarly, Australia is also important for India to have a significant say in the Indo-Pacific region for protecting the diaspora interest and to import several natural reserves, for example, coal. That is why in recent times India has been an active member in the grouping known as Quad. Now Quad group comprise of India, US, Japan as well as Australia. Moreover, there are certain other organizations also. For example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where India deals simultaneously with China, Russia, Iran, as well as Pakistan. Then India, as we have discussed, is also in Quad, whereby it is dealing with USA. Similarly, in BRICS, it is also dealing with Russia as well as China. And there is one more important grouping, that is I2U2, which stands for India, Israel, US, UAE. So if you closely look at this, India is carefully navigating its opportunities. It is dealing with China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, US, UAE, as well as Israel in different platforms. So this is basically the all alignment policy, which some people also call as multi-alignment or the strategic alignment. So this is purely in principle in contrast with the non-alignment. So now the question rises that what exactly more suits to the Indian interest, that is whether the non-alignment policy or the all alignment policy. Another important question arises is that whether the non-alignment policy was a total failure, because it is often argued that a country cannot survive in the world politics if it is not aligned or if it is not friendly to any other country. Otherwise, it will be in total isolation. So, what do you think? Whether non alignment was a complete failure or the non alignment was a bedrock foundation for the present all alignment strategy? We can understand this with an analogy that whenever you have to construct a building, first a foundation is constructed, and over that a building is constructed, and once the building becomes solid enough, its structure is resilient enough, then comes the beautification work, that is the work of aesthetics. So we cannot say that only the foundation will do our task, and we cannot say that only the aesthetics will do the task. Both the things are important, but to reach to this particular height of the building, you must have this particular foundation. So can we understand that non-alignment provided the India the room, it provided India the independence at that particular point of time when the whole world was divided between the major blocks. This particular strategy provided the India and protected its own interest. And then eventually the time came whereby India gained its economic strength, proved its military worth, and asserted its political right at the international platform. And that is why today we can steer the wheels of international politics towards the all alignment strategy. And all this discussion in today's newspaper has come in the context of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, which is going to be held. Because as we have discussed here, we are dealing with China, Russia, Iran, as well as Pakistan. So now let us analyze the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as an institution, as an organization. Now the SCO is a China-led 8-member economic and security bloc. These two terms are important in this regard. Economic as well as security bloc, and its founding members include, as you can see in this diagram also, Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. However, India and Pakistan, these two countries, were admitted later as full members in 2017. One important point here to be noted is that one Central Asian power, that is Turkmenistan, is not the part of SCO. Now we will understand the structure of the SCO. RATS, that is Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure, is a permanent body based in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. The objective of RATS is based upon the Shanghai Convention on combating the terrorism, separatism and extremism. As we have discussed that SCO is also a security bloc, that is why a specific dedicated body, RATS, is designed to tackle the challenges of terrorism, separatism, and extremism. The main objectives of the SEO is to strengthen the mutual trust among the neighbors in order to promote cooperation in politics, trade, economy, research, technology, and culture, education, energy, transport, tourism, environmental protection, and other areas. Which means that SEO deals virtually with all the major dimensions at which the international policies are required. Further, it also seeks to ensure peace, security, and stability in the region and moving towards the establishment of a democratic, fair, and rational new international political and economic order. So, from this, we conclude a very important point that SCO, though, is a regional body, but it has a global objective too. That is to transform and establish a new democratic, fair, rational, international political and economic order. Now we need to understand that why this body is of so much importance for India as well as its foreign policy. The relevance lies in the very importance of this particular region, that is Central Asian region, which offers multiple objectives for India. For example, energy security. As we know that Central Asian region is highly endowed with energy resources and India is trying to gain access through Chabar port construction in Iran. Further, India also has its Connect Central Asian policy. Second, for the economic growth. It is estimated that 40% of the world's population lives in the countries of SCO and they produce more than 20% of the global GDP, which is expected to almost double by 2025. So this means that it offers a huge economic potential to India also. Further, from the security point of view, as we discussed that there is a dedicated body to combat terrorism, which is known as RATS, it is viewed by India as a platform to access intelligence and information and further to use it to counter the international terrorism and organized crime, including drug trafficking and resolving the conflict in the unstable Afghanistan. Further, this region is also called as the gateway to Eurasia. Experts have claimed that India's membership in the SCO is an opportunity for India to engage the Eurasian Economic Union and thereby tapping the potential of the Eurasian market. Further, as we have already discussed, that it is also in line with the Connect Central Asian policy of India, which in turn enhances the status of India as a major pan-Asian player. Further, on the value and principle point of view, the Shanghai spirit. Now, this term is very important and this can be asked in the prelims also. Shanghai spirit emphasizes on the harmony, non-interference in others' internal affairs, which is very relevant in context of Indo-Pak and Indo-China relations, and non-alignment values that India has always cherished and upheld. Further, it also offers the platform to engage for the bilateral cooperation with countries like China as well as Pakistan. But then there are certain challenges for India also. The first and the biggest challenge is that this platform is dominated by China and Russia, who are the co-founder of the SCO and are the dominant powers in this region also. Thereby, it limits the India's ability to assert itself in this particular platform. The second challenge is China's Belt and Road Initiative, that is BRI. All the group members except India have endorsed China's BRI initiative. On the other hand, India has repeatedly opposed this initiative, citing sovereignty issues arising out of CPEC, that is China Pakistan Economic Corridor, which passes through the POK region, which India claims as its own. The third important challenge is India Pakistan rivalry. India and Pakistan are on continuous confrontation that makes it difficult to adhere to the idea of good neighborliness prescribed in the Article 1 of the SCO Charter. And the last important challenge is the definition of terrorism. Despite the fact that SCO has a dedicated body known as RATS to combat terrorism, but still the members are divided on the issue of defining the terrorism. India's definition of terrorism is different from the definition of SCO under RATS. For SCO, the terrorism coincides with the regime destabilization, whereas for India, it is related to state sponsored cross border terrorism. So these issues are there which limit India's benefits in this body, and these issues must be resolved at the earliest. So summing up the entire topic once again, that this topic has come in news because Mr. Jaishankar has raised issues at SCO virtual meeting, and he has criticized Pakistan and China for raising bilateral political issues at this regional organization. Then we discussed that the founding members of the SCO included China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and further India and Pakistan were admitted later in 2017. Then we discussed the structure of the SCO. The RATS body is specifically dedicated to combat terrorism and to ensure security, and further, SCO deals with almost all the major areas relating to culture, education, energy, economy, politics, trade, etc. And then we discussed in detail that what multidimensional benefits it offers to India in terms of energy, economy, security, regional connectivity, enhancing the political status in the region, and providing the platform for cooperation with China and Pakistan. And further in the end, we discussed the challenges associated for India in SCO, which comes in a manner that the platform is dominated by China and Russia, and the other challenges being India-Pakistan rivalry, issues in defining the terrorism which is acceptable to all the members, and India's strong stance to oppose China's BRI initiative in the context of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this topic, cognitive dissonance, has appeared at text and context page in today's The Hindu Delhi edition. Now, cognitive dissonance is a psychological thing, and from the examination's perspective, this forms the part of the General Studies Paper 4 syllabus because it mentions the specific section of attitude, content, structure, function, its influence, and its effect on the behavior. So, as you have rightly guessed, that this topic is from the GS4, that is ethics paper. It is very rare that the direct topics which can be used in ethics comes on daily basis in newspaper. So whenever it comes, obviously we have to take that very topic to cover the ethics also. So in this session today we are going to discuss what is the basic concept of cognitive dissonance and how we can address the cognitive dissonance in order to form our new attitudes. So let us start our discussion in detail. First, we will look at what exactly do we mean by cognitive dissonance. Now let us break this word in two parts. First is the cognitive thing. What is cognitive? It is something related to the mind. We can understand it. And in the mind, it is related to the conscious part. And dissonance is something which is contradictory in nature. So that means that the thoughts which are coming to our mind must be contradictory in nature, and that is why we are facing the situation of cognitive dissonance. I am again repeating it in a very simple language, that is the thoughts which are coming to our mind and we are able to understand those thoughts. That means that it is perfectly conscious thoughts. If those thoughts are contradictory in nature, we face the situation of cognitive dissonance. That is why it is said that inconsistency in your cognitions is known as cognitive dissonance. Right? Now, you yourself think that if you are facing the situation of cognitive dissonance, for example, there are two thoughts in your mind. One is that from your home, you have to go to the place known as A. Let's say here your friend's mom has fallen sick, and at the same time you have to go to the place B where your own mom has fallen sick. So now at that particular point of time you are facing the situation of cognitive dissonance, that whether you have to go towards A or towards B. So in such a situation you face tension or unease in your mind. There is a discomfort. Let us
take another example, the story of fox. Now the fox wants the grapes which are hanging very high on a tree, and the fox is not able to jump that high to get those grapes. After several tries, finally the fox gives up the hope. And then she finally believes that the grapes are not worthy to be eaten. So, what has she done? She has, in a way, modified her liking towards that grapes, and she has, in some way, alerted or has given signals to her mind that these grapes are not worthy enough to be eaten, and that is why it is waste of time to again try for those grapes. So, what does this fox has done? First was a situation whereby it was facing the cognitive dissonance. That is, she was having the liking towards that grapes. She wanted those grapes, but she understood that she could not get those grapes. So it created a dissonance in her mind. But then to overcome that dissonance, what did she do? She modified her liking towards that grapes and she thought that these grapes are not worthy to be eaten. This is perfectly the defense mechanism. As soon as the humans get inconsistent cognitions or the inconsistent or the contradictory thoughts in their mind, automatically the defense mechanism kicks in, because naturally the humans are motivated for the consistent cognitions. That is, whatever they think, whatever they do, it must be in sync with each other. But if there is cognitive dissonance, that means that it is not in sync, and that is why the defense mechanism will kick in and they will change the attitude or behavior or feeling or thought towards that particular thing. Let us take another example of excessive smoking or drinking habits. Now, most of the people know that smoking or drinking is injurious to their well being. On the other hand, most of them want to have a longer, healthy life. So, again, these two things are inconsistent. If you are drinking alcohol excessively, if you are smoking excessively, then obviously you cannot have a very long and healthy life. So there is a cognitive dissonance in their mind. How will they overcome that cognitive dissonance? Either they will start ignoring the detrimental health effects of smoking and drinking on their body, or they will start justifying or giving the health benefits of smoking or drinking, or they will come up with some examples of some humans who were having the habits of excessive smoking and drinking, but still they are having a healthy and long life. So, what they will try to do is that they will try to normalize the exceptional examples. So, that is how they will change their attitude, behavior, or feeling towards this particular thing. So, this is the overall concept of cognitive dissonance. And then comes the second part, that once we have faced this dissonance in our mind, how to address that dissonance. The first thing is that the humans should be mindful of their thoughts and their actions. They must refrain from any prejudgment and accept the observation on merits or facts. Let's take another example. Let us assume that there is a place A which you till now have not visited but have heard a lot about it. You have heard that that space is very beautiful. You have heard that place is very peaceful. But when in real times you went to that place, it was a very filthy area, plus there was a complete breakdown of law and order. So obviously then there will be a dissonance in your mind that what you have heard till now about that place, the picture, the image about that place which you were carrying till now has drastically altered, has drastically devastated when you have visited that place. Okay, so before visiting that place, what you have done was that you were having certain prejudgment. So you have to refrain from any prejudgment. You have to accept the observations and the real time facts. If you hear about some such place, just Google it, look for that place, have a clear facts about that place, and then visit that particular place. The second way to address the cognitive dissonance is changing the current beliefs by imparting and increasing the self knowledge. You should be aware about yourself, that how logical you are, how emotional you are,
which are those areas in which you take the decisions on the basis of merit, and which are those areas where you are primarily driven by your emotions. If you have this self knowledge, if you are self aware, then obviously you can challenge your current belief system and you can rectify your steps towards the correct path. The third thing is that you should not treat your cognitive dissonance in a negative manner. You should consider the importance of this dissonance thoughts, because whenever there is a cognitive dissonance, whenever we are facing a situation of contradictory ideas, there is also an opportunity to learn. So, if you can treat your cognitive dissonance, this contradictory situation, with a positive mindset as an opportunity, obviously you will be in a better position compared to other people to address your own cognitive dissonance. And the last thing is justifying the behavior. This we have already discussed with the example of smoking or drinking habits, or with the example of this fox story. In Hindi, there is a very famous saying, the angur khatte hain. So, this saying comes from this particular story. That is, because the fox was not able to catch those grapes, so she modified her feeling towards that grapes, that those grapes are not worthy to be eaten. So, this is the cognitive dissonance. Now, how this cognitive dissonance comes into picture in the life of civil servant. Now, as we all know, that civil servants or the bureaucrats in these times are facing very complex situations. The technologies are increasing, the social media is increasing. In fact, the nature of crimes are also changing. So, there are a lot of complexities, there is a lot of workload on their shoulders, and that is why there are several situations of dilemma, cognitive dissonance, etc. in their routine life. It is very normal for them. But again, the responsibility which lies on the civil servant's shoulders are way more than the responsibilities on the common men. So that is why there should be certain things which can help these civil servants to make them come out of their cognitive dissonant situations. So, which are those things which can help the civil servants to overcome their cognitive dissonance? First is the constitution, as well as the constitutional values. Second is their code of conducts. Third is their departmental instructions. Fourth is their training. Fifth is their emotional intelligence. Sixth is their personal beliefs. And seventh is the social beliefs. So now the question can come into your mind that how personal beliefs and social beliefs will help the civil servants to overcome their dissonance, because there can be a contradiction between the personal as well as social beliefs. So see, understand this thing, that these are the set of several guidelines. It might happen that there can be a conflict between constitutional values and social beliefs. There can be a conflict between departmental instructions and the constitutional value. So that is what exactly the cognitive dissonance is. But the civil servant's responsibility is that he or she will weigh that particular situation on the merits of all these things, and with the best of their capability, they will carve out some path to remove their cognitive dissonance. Now, this topic has appeared at text and context page, and as all of you can see, the topic is in relation to the natural rubber in India. The immediate context of this very article is falling prices of the rubber crops in India. It was witnessed that during the COVID pandemic times, because there was a very high demand of gloves and other products which were made out of rubber. But in the post pandemic times, this demand has drastically reduced, and therefore the prices of rubber has crashed. And this has severely affected the farmers growing the rubber. And that is why there is a widespread protest growing in the rubber growing regions against the authorities for their perceived delay in checking this slide or this price crash. So, this whole article talks about this very particular issue. But when it comes to the civil services examinations, then the syllabus clearly mentions this in the section of geography, that is General Studies paper 1, because it says distribution of key natural resources. And in natural resources, We obviously not have to restrict only to the metallic resources, but they also include the agricultural resources. Moreover, this news is also relevant from the prelims perspective because a direct question can be asked about the distribution or the growing conditions of the rubber. For example, in 2022 prelims, the question was asked in relation to the tea cultivation. So in this very regard, let us look at the factual information related to the rubber. First of all, as far as the distribution of rubber in India is concerned, the Rubber Board of India states that there are in total 11 states in which there is a rubber growth. The most dominant regions is the southern India, that is states of Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, as well as the northeastern India. And why the rubbers are restricted to the northeastern part or the southern India part? Because of the natural growing conditions of rubber. First of all, rubber is an equatorial crop. However, if certain conditions, for example, excess of rainfall, high humidity is present, then these crops can also be grown in tropical areas. And that is what exactly happens in India. The rainfall required for the proper rubber growth is more than 200 centimeter. This is annual average rainfall. The temperature required is above 25 degrees Celsius. Generally, the favorable temperature range for rubber production is 25 to 35 degrees Celsius. As far as the soil is concerned, there is a very specific requirement. However, the rubber can grow in the wide varieties of soil, but they can also be grown in those soils which otherwise are not suitable for other crops. For example, they require deep and lateritic soils. Deep soils are required for rubber production because rubber have deep roots. So, in order to have adequate space, deep soils are needed. Further, if those soils are acidic nature, then they will be highly favorable. The pH range is around 4.5 to 6. Further, it should also be deficient in the phosphorus. As far as the topography is concerned, the rubber plant is more favorably grown on the plain or gently undulating land areas. So these are the physical factors. Now we'll come at the human factors which affect the growth of rubber crop. These crops are labor intensive in nature, so that is why if these plantation crops are to be grown, then they can be grown in such areas where there is availability of cheap and abundant labor. Further, it is also very capital intensive because in initial 6 to 7 years there will be almost negligible income. So that is why it requires a huge patience. And last is obviously the transport and the market facilities in the nearby regions. The transportation infrastructure is required to ensure streamlined forward as well as backward linkages. And market is also required to sell these rubber crops in the nearby locations so as to ensure maximum profit. So these are the growing conditions for the rubber crop. These are the areas in which rubber is produced in India. And that is all for the prelims examination. This article has again appeared at page number 6 in today's The Hindu Delhi edition, and this article is in relation to the India's patent ecosystem. The context of this very news article is that recently there was a report by the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister titled Why India Needs to Urgently Invest in Its Patent Ecosystem, and it has showed that despite there has been a significant increase in the filing of the patents in India, but still there are a number of abandoned patents lying in the patent office. So in this very relation in today's session, we are going to discuss all the important dimensions associated with this very topic. In today's session, we are going to learn what exactly do we mean by patent, what are different categories in the India's intellectual property rights ecosystem, what were the broad objectives of the national IPR policy, what are the major concerns highlighted in this particular report in the context of patent filing in India, and in the last we will also discuss what can be a way ahead, a strategy which needs to be adopted in order to enhance the efficiency of India's IPR ecosystem. So let us begin our discussion in this context. First of all, what exactly is the patent? Now, whenever, let's assume that you come up with some unique product, you make your own product or you make your own process to make any product, if that is unique and has never been made in such a manner by anyone else, then you are granted an exclusive right over that product or process. This exclusive right is the patent. By this exclusive right, you get the power that only you will be making that product or process for the commercial purpose, and no one else can make that product or process for the commercial purpose without your consent or permission. There are certain things which needs to be there in order to have that patent right. First is that invention must be new, or that product or process can be having an inventive step which did not existed before. Let's say let's say there was a bicycle few years back, and now you have come up with some important process in the bicycle. You have not made a bicycle a different product as such, but you have made some new features. You have introduced certain new things in that bicycle which did not existed before, and that product also have certain industrial applications. So if these criteria are fulfilled, you are granted an exclusive right which is known as the patent. The timeline for this exclusive right is for 20 years. That means for 20 years, no one else can make that product or process and use it for the commercial purposes. As far as India is concerned, it grants the legal protection to various inventions through the Patents Act 1970. But this patent is only one form of intellectual property rights. There are other categories also. This is a chart showing the various categories in India's intellectual property rights ecosystem. First is the patents, as we have already discussed. It is given to the new products and processes under the Patents Act 1970. Ministry of Commerce is the overall authority of this, and the time limit for the patent rights is 20 years. Second similar thing is the trademarks. Now many a times you might be using these words interchangeably, that patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc. But they have significant differences in it. Patent is given on the new products and processes. Trademarks are given to name, word, phrase, logo, symbol, design, image, or combination of these elements. For example, Nike has this sign. So this is not the patent. This is a trademark because it is given to a logo or a symbol. Patent is given to a product. Let's say Apple Mobile. So that this design, this logo will be given as a trademark. The overall design, but the overall smartphone, the product will be given patent. This trademarks is given under Trademark Act 1999. Again, Ministry of Commerce is the overall authority. The time limit for trademarks is 10 years. The next is the geographical indication. Now, as the name is suggesting, it has something to do with the geographical location. So it is a sign used on some products that have a specific geographical origin. Now see, patents were also given to the products, GIs are also given to the products, but these products have certain geographical localness. That is, those products are made or formed only in certain geographical areas. For example, Banarasi sari or Darjeeling tea. Okay, so patents is not restricted to any geographical location, but GI indication is restricted to certain geographical areas. And this is granted under the Geographical Indication of Goods Registration and Protection Act 1999. Again, Ministry of Commerce and Industry is the overall authority. Period is for 10 years. Next comes another very famous intellectual property right, that is copyrights. And we all know that copyrights are not on products or process or logos or symbol. Copyrights are for the literary things. So it can be literary, dramatic, music, artistic works, and the producers of the cinematograph, films, and sound recordings. This is granted under the Copyrights Act 1957. Ministry of Commerce and Industry is the overall authority for it. However, before 2016, the overall authority was the HRD Ministry. But the time limit of this copyright is 60 years. Now this is a very long period. Next comes the designs. It may consist of 3D features such as the shape of an article or 2D features such as patterns, lines or colors. Granted under Designs Act 2000, Ministry of Commerce, and period is for 10 years. Then there are plant varieties protection. It is done specifically to protect the rights of the farmers and breeders to encourage the development of new varieties of plants. So they are specifically targeted towards farmers and the plant breeders. The specific act is the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmer Rights Act 2011. Overall ministry is Ministry of Agriculture, and there is a variation in the time limits, that is 15 years for the field crops, 18 years for the trees and vines. And the last one is semiconductors and integrated layouts. So obviously, as the name is suggesting, these are the intellectual property rights given on semiconductors and the circuit layouts under their respective act of 2000. But the ministry here is Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Now there is one more body, that is CPAM, which is known as Cell for IPR Promotion and Management, and it has been created as a professional body under the aegis of Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, which comes under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And it is specifically tasked to take forward the implementation of the National IPR Policy 2016. Now this National IPR Policy 2016 takes into account the overall ecosystem of the intellectual property rights in India. And that is why now we will discuss some of the important objectives of the National IPR Policy 2016. So the objectives are very clear and specific. First is IPR awareness, and for this the institutions, the establishments, the organizations have to conduct an outreach and promotion programs on regular basis. The second objective obviously will be the generation of the IPRs in India. And for this generation, once the IPRs are generated, then comes the framework to govern these IPRs, and this is the third objective of the policy, that is to come up with the legal and legislative framework to balance the interests of the rights owners as well as the larger public. Then comes the overall administration and management, and the objective is to create this service-oriented IPR administration. Then once the intellectual property rights are laid down, they are given, then comes the objective of its commercialization to get the values of those IPRs through commercialization. But yes, we all can understand that because we are dealing with intellectual property, so there will be a lot of cases also, and to rectify those things, there should be enforcement and adjudication mechanisms also. And the last objective comes in the form of human capital development, that is to expand the human resources, institutions and capacities for teaching, training, research and skill building programs. So again, what are the objectives of IPR Policy 2016? Starting from the awareness and generation of the IPRs to enforcement and adjudication mechanisms and strengthening the human resource development. All the components of this entire journey is taken care by the National IPR Policy 2016. However, the today's article is not just about the IPR policy, it is about the critical analysis of the patent filing systems in India. And as in the context we have seen that there was a report laid down by the Economic Advisory Council, that particular report has highlighted major concerns in the India's patent filing ecosystem. The first and the foremost concern is, the report says that India is facing an acute manpower shortage. When it comes to the cross-country comparison, you can see India is lagging far behind US and China in almost every year. Further, the report has said that there is a gross disbalance between the personnel involved at the examiner levels as well as the controller levels.
Recently, there was a recruitment at the first examination level, that is at the examiner level, and the ratio has slightly increased. But because the corresponding recruitment at the controller level has not taken place, so what has happened is that there are several abandoned patents. The At the scrutiny level, you have increased the workforce, but at the final, that is at the granting, at the disposal level, you have not increased the workforce. So what will happen? There will be higher screenings of the patents. The files will be moving at a huge number from level 1 to the top levels, but at the top levels, you do not have the human resource to tackle all those files, to take care of all those files. The second concern is that there are no fixed timelines for each step of the process. For example, Section 25(1) of the Patents Act 1970 says that the pre-grant opposition can be filed at any time after the patent application has been published, but before it has been granted. So because now there is no time limit, so there are huge build-ups, there are huge delays, and also there are frivolous complaints which drastically increase the workload on the patent office. The third issue is in relation to the abandoned applications. Many of the patents have been filed by the inventors, but those applications are lying abandoned in the patent office. There can be several reasons for it. For example, the applicants might at first go have filed for their patents, but are not confident enough that their innovation will pass the scrutiny. So what happens is that at first level they file the patents, but then they do not pursue it further. So it increases the workload and also increases the ratio of the abandoned applications. Further, for those innovations which have very short lifespans, for example 5 years or 10 years, it is possible that the long pendency discourages the applicants from following up on their applications. The next concern is related to the cumbersome compliance requirements which further delay the process. For example, there are certain provisions of the Patents Act 1970 which require an applicant to keep submitting on regular basis, keep submitting the information leading to the prosecution of foreign patent applications in periodic manner. So obviously because there are continuous submission, it makes it cumbersome also, and it also increases the workload. Then there is not much focus on industry academia collaboration. And because of the lack of this very focus, India has declined its ranking in the Global Innovation Index. The draft National Auto Policy 2018 pointed out that the collaboration between the industry and academia in India has been limited to the niche research areas that have very low commercial significance. Clear? So again, I am repeating the concerns which are highlighted in this report. First is the lack of adequate manpower. Second is there are no fixed timelines for each step. Then there are very high abandoned applications. Then is the cumbersome compliance requirements. And last is the lack of industry academia collaboration. So now the question is what needs to be done? Obviously, we need to tackle all those challenges. For example, if there is lack of manpower, then obviously we have to increase in manpower. We have to invest in human resource development. We have to provide the skills to the examiners, to the controllers, as well as to the patent filers. So that is why second point is the skill enhancement. Similarly, we have to address the procedural issues also. We have to reduce this cumbersome regular updation and submissions of the reports. So the cumbersome compliance requirements must also be reduced. This topic has appeared at page number 7 and is in relation to the draft Indian Ports Bill 2022. This is the very context of this article. The Indian Ports Act of 1908 is obsolete in many respects and it needs a complete overhaul. As we all know that the ports for India have a very high economic as well as strategic significance because majority of the trade by value as well as volume in India is done by its port. The 2022 draft of the bill is an improvement over 2021 draft, but it has its own issues. So because till now, these bills are just in the drafting stage, and hence we need not to go in very detail of all those provisions. But in today's session, we are going to look at certain important key provisions of this draft, and we will also look at the major ports of India in this very context. So this is the India's map showing the major ports of India, starting from Kandla in Gujarat, Mumbai, JNPT, Mormugao, New Mangalore, Cochin. Then comes the east coast, Tuticorin, Chennai, Ennore, Vishakhapatnam, Paradip, and then Kolkata Haldia port. In totality, India has 13 major ports and around 212 non-major ports. The major ports come under the union list, that means the center's jurisdiction, and the non-major ports comes under the concurrent list. That means they are given under the respective state governments. However, obviously we understand that if it is in the concurrent list and if there is some contention between the center and the state, then obviously the center will overrule the direction of the state government. As we all know that India has a very long coastline of around 7517 kilometers, and further it also has 14,500 kilometers of navigable waters. Plus, given the fact that 95% of India's trade by volume and 65% by value is done through the maritime route, these ports become very important. But again, we all know that India's port ecosystem is not up to the mark when compared with the international standards. It has a very high returning time. There are not adequate logistics facilities. Then there are very cumbersome processes, legal formalities, procedures also. So that is why the draft bill of 2021 came up with certain major provisions. First, it said that the Indian Ports Act, that is 1908, will be repealed. Second, for effective administration and their incorporation, it recommended the establishment of the state maritime boards. The bill does not focus towards the major ports, it also tried to bring the provisions for the non-major ports for their management and control. Further, the bill also proposed the establishment of the National Council for Structured Growth and Development of the Port Sector. It tried to establish the adjudicatory mechanisms for the port-related issues as well. And in the last, the bill seek to ensure the compliance with the international maritime treaties and other instruments reducing the port pollution. So as we have discussed in the beginning that because these bills are still in the drafting stage, earlier there was 2021 draft, now we have 2022 draft. So we have to wait and watch that what the fate of these drafts will be. So now let us begin with our last topic for today's session. This topic has appeared at the text and the context page, and the topic reads Understanding the Windfall Tax. That means it becomes important from the economy's perspective, and this topic is mainly relevant from the prelims examination. Because from the prelims examination's perspective, you need to be aware that what exactly do you mean by this particular term, that is windfall tax. This article has appeared in today's The Hindu Delhi edition in the context that because recently the government has imposed a special additional excise duty of rupees 23,000 per ton on the sale of locally produced crude oil. So in today's discussion, we need to understand that what exactly do we mean by windfall tax and how is it related to the locally produced crude oil. For this to understand, first we need to know that what is the background of the tax on the crude oil in India. First of all, in India, the crude oil comes from two sources. One is the foreign sources from where India imports certain crude oil, and second is the local crude oil which is produced from within the India's domestic boundaries, that is from within the India's own boundaries. Okay. So this is domestically produced and this is foreign produced. So around 80% of the total crude oil demand of India comes from the foreign countries, that is via imports, and 20% is just domestically produced. However, an interesting fact is that the domestic crude oil which is
produced within our territory is also sold to the domestic refineries at the prevailing international crude oil prices. This is important. Let's say the international crude oil prices is $1 per barrel. Obviously, this is just an assumed figure. Okay, $1 per barrel. So the domestically produced crude oil will also be sold at this particular price to the domestic refineries. That is, the price will remain same. This further means if there is a fall in the international crude oil prices, the prices of the domestically produced crude oil will also fall. And conversely, if there is increase in the international crude oil prices, the prices of domestic crude oil will also increase. In recent times, we have seen that there has been a drastically rise in the international crude oil prices. So obviously this will mean that the prices of the crude oil of the domestic producers will also increase, right? So this means that the profit margins of these domestic crude oil producers will increase, and that is known as the windfall gains. What is windfall gains? These are those excessive profits which are made by some company because of the external factors. That is, the company itself has not done anything to increase its profit. The profit are merely because of the change in the external factors, for example, geopolitical factors. So that is why, what is windfall tax? It is a form of tax which is imposed on the profits of a company. Usually, such profits are earned due to sudden changes in the external environment and not due to any concrete efforts by the company. So, in general, the taxes which are imposed on such profits are referred to as windfall tax. So, I hope that this particular term, windfall tax, is clear to you. The question can be asked on this windfall tax or this terminology, which is the windfall gains or windfall profits. Clear? So now let us discuss the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS dated 13th September 2022 was in relation to the power generation of India. There were two statements given. The statement 1 was highest share of power generation source in India is coal. Statement 2 was India is the third largest per capita power generating nation in the world. You have to find the correct statements out of these given two statements. The second statement is incorrect and statement 1 is correct. And hence, option A, that is 1 only, is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is in front of you. The question asks you which of the following pairs are correctly matched. 1. Patents, 20 years, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. 2. Copyright, 60 years, Ministry of Education. 3. Plant Variety Protection, 60 years, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. 4. Semiconductors and Integrated Layouts, 10 years, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. You have to find the correct pairs out of the codes given below. A. 2 and 3 only. B. 1 and 2 only. C. 1 and 4 only. Or D. 3 and 4 only. So that's all for today. All the very best and study hard.